Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Still hungry for more Bill O'Reilly? In just a bit, he will join us on this program. Also, is free speech withering away on college campuses? Well, of course it is. Today, protests erupted at yet another university after sociologist Charles Murray showed up with some of his opinions. We'll take you live to that school. But first tonight, Democrats are lashing out at House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes, saying he needs to recuse himself from the House of Representatives' investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The only person who can force him to do this, though, is the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and he is defending Nunes so far.
I still don't know why, and if you guys give me a reason to recuse myself, I might consider it.
One, should Devin Nunes recuse himself from the Russia investigation? And two, do you know the source of his information?
No one knows. It's not up to me. He's a member of the House. He's appointed by the Speaker. That is entirely up to the Speaker and the membership of the House of Representatives.
Zach Buchanan is a senior advisor to the Democratic National Committee, or at least he was as of this afternoon when the new chairman of that committee, Tom Perez, asked everyone to resign by the end of the month. Zach joins us here in the studio. So Zach, I got to start off by asking, are you still working for the DNC?
I am today. My contract ends at the end of this week, as it was planned since January.
Well, good for Tom Perez for looking within a little bit and not just ranting about Russia, but asking, how did the single most impressive person in the history of the world lose to Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, I think we know about how the single most impressive person lost to Donald Trump, and it was in part by the Russian government.
So
and the
here's
Kremlin.
What doesn't make sense. Okay, so for the last 3 or 4 months, Democrats have been saying every night in this show, Trump is a puppet of the Kremlin. He's doing the bidding of the Putin government. The entire Russian economy is based on energy. Trump's views on energy are very pro-American. He wants more energy exploration and production in this country. He's totally for fracking. If you were doing the Kremlin's bidding, you would have Al Gore's position. You'd be against fracking, and you'd be talking a lot about global warming. How does it even make sense that Trump is doing the bidding of Russia?
Well, it makes sense that Trump is doing the bidding of Russia if you look at the actions that he has taken as president. The actual things that he has done is he has removed sanctions on the FSB, which is the Russian spy network. He's also attacked NATO, which is one of the top priorities of Vladimir Putin. And he continues to praise Putin at every turn. And not only that, he goes up and attacks the European Union, which again is an adversary of Putin.
He loves Putin. I'll grant you that. I mean, I don't think it's true, but whatever. NATO was a bulwark against Soviet communism. It was great. But you got to think that Putin's priorities maybe have changed a little bit in the 26 years since the Soviet Union collapsed, and that maybe maintaining their economy might be at the top of the list. So Trump is actually working against Russian interests on that, the biggest question of all. And he's also calling for more military spending and expanding the U.S. Navy and Air Force. Why in the world would Putin be for that?
I mean, I don't understand how you can say that Putin is for American policy and that Donald Trump is whatever you just said.
I'm just making the obvious point that Al Gore and Hillary Clinton's views on energy, the single most important question in the Russian economy, are much closer to Putin's than Trump.
And what I'm saying is that the single and most important thing for the Russian economy is the lifting sanctions, and that is what Donald Trump and his administration is going.
That's not true at all.
No, it is absolutely.
It's the price of natural gas, as you know, which is why they funded propaganda against fracking.
No, I mean the most important thing, which is why that the ambassador to Russia, Kislyak, freaked out when it looked like the administration was going to impose new sanctions, which is why they called Michael Flynn.
They don't want sanctions, but
well, I mean, it is a disaster for their economy.
But their propaganda channel is not running long pieces about sanctions, running long pieces about fracking and how it's bad. They're on your side with the fracking.
First off, the Russian propaganda absolutely was running long pieces about sanctions. They were boosting that up right after Donald Trump won, and they were talking about what an important boon this was going to be for the Russian economy. So you're wrong on that front.
So your point is, and the point of Democrats, speaking in lockstep as always, is that Devin Nunes is such a partisan that he cannot continue in his role as chairman of the House Intel Committee. If he was such a partisan, and he's partisan, of course, he's an elected Republican, but if he was so partisan that partisanship guided his every action, why would he be allowing hearings on any of this in the first place? Democrats would never allow hearings on something that hurt their president.
Well, first off, he just canceled a public hearing on Friday where Sally Yates was going to come and testify, and he canceled it the same day. It turned out that Sally Yates was going to come and contradict statements that the White House had made about Michael Flynn,
but I'm just saying,
and then he pulls the plug. So if your argument is that Devin Nunes is not partisan because he's allowing hearings, he's not. He just canceled 2 of them.
Okay. We've had a bunch of hearings. We will have more. He is the chairman of this committee, is allowing this investigation to go forward. I'm just saying, as you well know, with a Democrat in the White House and Democratic-controlled Congress, this would never happen because it's going to hurt our guy. We're not doing it, period. And he's allowing it. So
at some point, we have to start thinking like Americans and not partisans. We have a hostile foreign power that interjected itself into this election.
Okay, I've heard the talking points. These are not talking points. This is about basic,
as
you know. But let's get to the specifics.
Do you not believe that Russia came in and intervened in the election?
I don't believe, as we've discussed multiple times, I don't believe that Russia affected the outcome of this election.
Nobody's arguing that.
Russia wishes us well.
No, nobody's arguing that.
But I don't think they had a measurable effect, and so I think this whole conversation is stupid. But I'm not in charge of what the conversation is. You guys are. So let me ask you specifically.
Sure.
If Nunes were to step aside, who would you like to run the committee? Who'd be less partisan? Would Trey Gowdy?
No, what we are calling for is an independent 9/11 style commission.
To be chosen by whom?
To be chosen by Congress. There's a process for this. The 9/11 Commission was done after the 9/11 attacks. There's precedent for this of how it's done. That's something that the Congress would decide.
Oh, but wouldn't that be partisan? Because it would be partisans choosing it.
No, in the 9/11 Commission, there were 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. They interviewed about 1,200 people. It was not partisan. It was specifically decided not to be partisan.
That settled the basic questions about 9/11, which we're still arguing about today. I mean, look, let's be totally real. If you want a non-partisan commission, you would have a popular vote on the subject. Who should serve on that commission? That's how you would do it. You can't take partisanship out of a partisan process, and you know that. And your motives are partisan in the first place. So this is a dumb conversation. Why not have the real conversation, which is, did and to what extent Russia affect the outcome of the election, and did the U.S. government spy on Trump, the candidate, or not? And so, those are the real questions.
Yes, which I'm very happy to talk about, and it are some of the questions that this independent commission would look at, and what we need to find the answers to.
So here's what we know. We know that intel agencies run by Barack Obama spied on the Trump transition team.
False.
Really? Because the director of the FBI said that.
No, he didn't.
Actually, he did.
No, he didn't.
Yes, well, he certainly did. He said that there was yes, he did. He said it right in front of Congress. He said there was an investigation into Russian interference, and it centered on people in the Trump orbit. That's exactly what he said. And so what do you think of that? Does that bother you?
There is a difference between an investigation and spying on members of the transition team.
Really?
What we do
How
know
could
is
you have
that
an investigation without spying on members of the transition team? How would that be possible?
That is a very specific term when you're talking about surveillance as opposed to
whatever. It's
general investigation.
You're watching people without
you're just
their
making
knowledge.
stuff up. No,
I'm not giving anything.
No, you are. What we do know is that the FBI has been running an investigation since July. We do not know the methods.
With no surveillance.
I don't know that. Do you know that?
I know that the NSA sweeps up virtually every electronic communication in the United States. Its former employees have conceded that. The Snowden papers prove it. And I'm bothered by it. Now, you claim to be a liberal. Why am I the liberal in this case, arguing for civil liberties and the right to privacy? Why aren't you upset about this?
You were injecting facts that don't actually exist.
What do you mean they don't exist?
You were supposing,
disputing what I just said.
Yes, you are supposing that the NSA is somehow involved in this, and they're sweeping up all sorts of communications that are there. I mean, please point to a specific communication that you're talking about. Just point to one. Just point to one.
This is like arguing about the sunrise. We know that the NSA
just point to one specific thing that you're talking about.
I don't think you will meet anybody of either party on the Senate or House Intel Committee.
One example.
All electronic communications in the United States.
Example.
The email you sent this morning.
What was the email I sent this morning?
I don't know. I don't work for the NSA. The point is they have access to it, and we should be worried about it. That's all I'm saying.
Helicopters
and I'm wondering. It's not a helicopter question. It's a fact. Zach, good to see you.
You too.
Well, the collective meltdown over Nunes' behavior is convenient because it allows Congress and the press to ignore what he actually says, part of which is that Americans are apparently having their information incidentally caught in an intelligence dragnet.
I recently confirmed that on numerous occasions, the intelligence community incidentally collected information about U.S. citizens involved in the Trump transition.
If this is all about improper unmasking of, incidentally collected U.S. information, he did exactly the wrong thing.
Incidental collection is not surveilling a campaign or American citizen. It's surveilling a foreign agent. There are rules about when you have incidental collection, what you do with it. I'd be curious to see if those rules will follow.
Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina says that instead of chasing, or maybe in addition to chasing, Russia phantoms, Congress and the press ought to be more worried about how American citizens are being spied upon and then unmasked by unscrupulous intelligence officials, probably for political reasons. Congressman Gowdy of South Carolina joins us now. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So I don't really know what the purpose of all these statements from members of the committee are on both sides. I'm paying close attention. I'm totally confused. So can you just give us a quick summation of what we know for certain about spying on American citizens, including the Trump campaign?
Well, what we know is that if there is an evidentiary basis for the president's tweet, it has not been shared with the public. So we'll get that out of the way. The allegation was very specific. President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower.
Yes.
There is not an evidentiary basis for that. Where it gets a little more complicated is there are surveillance methodologies that allow the collection of hypothetically foreign-to-foreign communications. And to the extent that U.S. citizens are mentioned or collected in that, in those surveillance programs, they're masked. And I think you want the information collected from a national security standpoint, but the masking is important. So with General Flynn, with the public reporting is that he was unmasked. All right, that's not only a breach of protocol, that's a violation of the law. That's the felonious dissemination of classified material. And what Chairman Nunes' point is, I want to know whether or not other people have been unmasked, even though you don't know about it publicly yet.
Interesting, but it would be known in the intelligence community. So my understanding from watching Director Comey is that intel agencies reporting to the Obama White House initiated an investigation of people around candidate Trump before his inauguration. Is that your understanding?
It is not, and I would be surprised if anybody could confirm that. There's a warrant process that you have to go through with the FISA court, and it has to be approved. And again, there's a public record of all of this, Tucker, which would be in the custody of the now Trump Department of Justice. So if there were an evidentiary basis for that, it's pretty easy to lay that out. There's a paper trail.
Why would Director Comey be willing to reveal the existence of some investigations but not comment on others?
That was really surprising to me. If you remember what he said, he sought special dispensation from the Department of Justice to confirm not just a counterintelligence investigation, but one that may manifest itself with criminality. But yet when I asked him about the leaks, he said he could not confirm that there was an investigation. I think they're both of national interest. One happens to be a felony. So I was a little surprised and a little disappointed that he can't at least tell us we are investigating the felonious dissemination of classified material.
And yet he can tell us other things that may suit the agendas of others. It seemed bizarre. Now, we interviewed someone on this show last week who spent 30 years at NSA, Mr. Binney, who said that there is no question that the NSA has personal communications from then-candidate Trump and those around him on its servers. Do you think that that's true?
It depends. It depends on who they're talking to. If you are talking to someone for whom the intelligence agencies are authorized to collect, then yes, you may be captured on it. If there is a reason to collect on a non-U.S. citizen and you happen to call that person, then you would be collected as a U.S. citizen. That's where the masking and treating it confidentially comes into effect.
But he was saying, and again, he worked there for all those years, that NSA collects basically all data coming in and out of the United States because they've tapped into the main data trunk. And the question is, what do they do with it? But they have it. Is that your understanding? Is that true?
I think that's a little broader than what my understanding is. You would have to get a warrant. If you're talking about a U.S. citizen, you have to get a warrant, application, FISA court. If you are talking foreign to foreign, it's a separate analysis. If you're talking U.S. to foreign, it's still a separate analysis and one that would require going to the FISA court.
So my last question, you sit on the committee that oversees our intelligence agencies. Are you satisfied that if you request a specific accounting of something that you're going to get it, you're going to get a straightforward answer and get the entire answer?
I don't know that I would, Tucker, and I'm not dodging your question. There's something called the Gang of Eight. They are entitled to information that even HPSI members are not. Members of the committee would receive that information, you think? Speaker of the House, the minority leader, ranking member, and the chairman of HPSI are four in the Gang of Eight. If you're just a HPSI member like I am.
I get it, but
may
you think
not.
they can get whatever they want and they can get the full story, and the intel agencies will give it to them and feel the obligation to give it to them?
They should, and I only caveat it by saying should, because when one source has the information and the other's requesting it, you never know what you're not
Well,
given.
you never
but
do
they
know
should.
that. And that's the concern for ordinary voters like me.
Yes, sir.
Congressman, thanks for coming on. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still confused and maybe tired of this whole Russia story? We don't blame you. Up next, Britt Hume will join us to say what exactly is going on here. Do we need an independent investigation, so-called, needed to resolve it? Also, sociologist Charles Murray was at Notre Dame today. He has interesting ideas about the decline of the working class. But instead of listening to those ideas, a bunch of people started yelling at him. We'll go there live ahead. Well, it seems like you need a PhD at minimum to understand the countless different strands of the Trump-Russia controversy / conspiracy theory. You have alleged Russian hacking, allegations of collaboration between the president and Putin, intelligence agencies spying on American citizens, and now, of course, a ton of congressional bungling. What to make of all this? Is an independent investigation needed to get to the bottom of it? Or should we just move on and try to forget this ever happened? Assuming anything happened at all. Fox News senior political analyst Britt Hume joins us now. Hey, Britt, I go back and forth on this, whether this is pure politics or there's something deeper, and I'm leaning toward the latter now. I've had a couple members of Congress, on air and off, get emotional on this subject of Russian hacking or interference with the last election. And I'm starting to think that that this really is kind of the touchstone in their view to understanding all of American politics. Do you think they believe it?
I think they may, Tucker, and I think the question is whether that is what this is about. That is to say, an effort by Russia to meddle in our elections, a hostile act to be sure, perhaps even, as Dick Cheney suggested, an act of war. I think if that was what this was really about, if that was what this case was really about, there would be almost unanimous bipartisan agreement that we all need to get to the bottom of it and find out what happened. However, there are two other elements that have become part of this as well. One of them is the question of whether the Russians were acting in collusion with the Trump campaign, of which there is scant evidence so far, but a lot of allegations and a lot of suspicions voiced about that. And of course, the final element is this question of whether the United States intelligence agencies, having incidentally swept up the names and information from or conversations by certain American citizens, then proceeded to mishandle that information. The identities, of course, in situations like that, as your previous guests have mentioned, are supposed to be masked. That is to say, not revealed, not even revealed across the intelligence agencies. And it appeared that those constraints were not observed in some cases here. Yeah. That is what Devin Nunes has been talking about as the chairman of that committee, and that is the information, or related to the information, that he apparently has been told confidentially from someone within the intelligence services. The Democrats, of course, would like this to be about the allegations of collusion, and the Republicans would like it to focus more on the allegations of the misuse of intelligence against American citizens by the Obama administration. My sense about this is that this reminds me of a lot of congressional investigations that I've covered through the years, in which there's a lot of politics involved. It's kind of an adversarial proceeding, and on one side, one party tries to adduce information that helps their side of the argument, and the other party does the other thing. And out of that kind of adversarial proceeding, truth often emerges. It did during Watergate, it did during Iran-Contra, and it has in many other cases. I don't think we're anywhere near in a situation where there's enough information on either those counts to go for some kind of outside special counsel.
You know what it reminds me of? And you were, of course, at the center of this. 1993, you covered this. Republicans couldn't understand how anyone could have voted for Bill Clinton. They just couldn't make sense of it at all. And so all these theories arose about running drugs in and out of Mina Airport or killing people, rather than just addressing it directly, that he had a message they may have disagreed with, but that was resonant with voters. I think the Democrats still don't understand why Trump won. And so they've made up this incredibly elaborate explanation having to do with Russia that is psychologically satisfying, but maybe not politically helpful long term.
I'm not sure how deeply they believe it, but they'd love it. They'd love it to be true, Tucker, because they believe, based on things apart from this, that Donald Trump is basically an illegitimate president, a man who has no qualifications for the job, is an execrable person, and should not be the president. And they're afraid that he will have the presidency for 4 years, and they'll roll back their agenda, and he'll cause all kinds of problems. And they can't stand the guy. No. And if it could be shown that he colluded with Russia to get elected, well, that would undermine his presidency almost totally.
Right.
That is what they're going for, and that, in my view, from their side of it, is what this is about.
Boy, they really, really don't like to lose power. It's unbelievable, actually. Britt, thank you for that.
Well,
that
in my
really
experience in Washington, nobody ever does.
No, that's true. Some are better than others, though. Thank you. Up next, a coalition of mayors led by New York's Bill de Blasio is resisting the president's efforts to stamp out sanctuary cities or defund them. After the break, we'll talk to a law professor who, perhaps ironically, supports their efforts to undermine the law. Stay tuned.
More.
Well, today's the second day of the first ever Sanctuary Cities Conference. It has gathered local politicians from across the country for the collective purpose of defying immigration law. They don't lack support in America's largest cities. Top officials from both Los Angeles and New York have announced they will defy the administration's efforts to suppress sanctuary cities and enforce immigration law.
In Los Angeles, we don't separate children from their families because it's inhumane. In Los Angeles, we don't demonize our hardworking neighbors just because they speak a different language or come from a different country. That's un-American.
The Department of Justice will also take all lawful steps to claw back any funds awarded to a jurisdiction that willfully violates 1373.
New York City is the safest city in this country. And so, you know, if the president wants to put that at risk to make a point to a dwindling base of support, then he is being extremely irresponsible, but that's nothing new for this administration.
Peter Markowitz is a professor at the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law, also an immigration advocate who spoke at day 2 of today's conference. He joins us now. Peter, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So you just heard the mayor of Los Angeles describe American immigration law as, quote, inhumane. You've described it that way, too, in a piece last summer in the New York Times. I think there are legitimate disagreements in immigration, but it seems a little insulting to the country, a country that has allowed 11 million people to live here illegally, giving them all benefits, by the way, at great expense, to describe that country as inhumane or its laws as cruel. What country has done as much as we have for illegal aliens?
Well, actually, there are very few things that you can find consensus among Republicans and Democrats in this country. But one thing that everybody seems to agree on is that our immigration laws are deeply broken. And so it's not at all surprising that the mayors of the cities that have the largest immigrant populations, who see the harm up front of a massive deportation system that's ripping apart families, identify the reality that those are, at base, inhumane laws.
You know, I just find so remarkable the insult to the population. I mean, immigration has upsides for sure, but it also has real costs, measurable costs, which have been measured actually, costs to American citizens who are here and born here and all that. And their views and lives are never taken into account in this equation. It's you're being mean to people here illegal. What about everybody else?
Actually, to the contrary, the vast majority of the reliable studies that have been conducted show both that immigrants make our country more vital economically for all Americans, but also that sanctuary laws, the laws that were discussed at today's conference, make our cities and our country safer. So very much we're thinking not just about the immigrant population, but about all Americans and the way we benefit from immigration.
So I know that you're a law professor, not an economist, but a lot's been written on this, and I'm a little surprised you haven't read it. So the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, which has existed a long time, but under the Obama administration, 2010, did a study on this, and here's part of what they concluded. I'm reading it verbatim. Illegal immigration has tended to depress both wages and employment for low-skilled Americans, a disproportionate number of whom are black men. Now, I don't know of any economist who would dispute that fact. When you flood a market with low-wage labor, it hurts people at the bottom, and it is disproportionately black men. Why don't you admit that? And does that bother you?
Right. Well, actually, there has been a wealth of data showing that immigrants actually are a boon to our economy. But to the extent that immigrants are being exploited and underpaid, the reason why that's happening is because Republicans have obstructed comprehensive immigration reform, which would allow them to have work authorization and then be able to get paid a living wage.
I want you to be able to give your point of view, but I also want you to address what I just said. So the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, this is not some right-wing group, has said what I think every economist has said who's looked at it carefully, that there are parts of the economy that benefit from illegal immigration and low-wage immigration. Rich people benefit disproportionately, but low-wage workers, disproportionately black men, are not beneficiaries of this. Are you denying that specific fact, which is a meaningful fact?
So you could pick and choose one line from one report. What I'm telling you is that...
The theme.
you're actually reading one line from one report. And what I'm telling you is that the theme that runs across the economic research is that immigrants are a boon to our economy and are a boon to American workers. And that's why...
Including at the lower end of the labor scale? So people working for minimum wage benefit from illegal immigration? Are you saying that with a straight face? And what can you cite that proves that? There's not one thing ever written that proves that.
What I'm telling you with a very straight face is that if you're worried about low-wage workers, you need to stop the mechanisms of exploitation that allows immigrants to be underpaid. And the way to do that is to create a pathway to legalization such that they can no longer be exploited and we can level the playing field.
Well, I think you have a fair point. They are exploited in a lot of cases. That's a real thing. But I'm not talking about people who broke our laws to come here from other countries and work under the table. I'm talking about people who were born here, including black people whose families have been here for 400 years. We have some concern for them. If we're the U.S. government, our whole purpose is to look out for them. And we're not. And we're not even talking about them. And you keep dodging questions about them like they don't matter, but they do matter. And will you acknowledge that they are not helped by this? In what sense could they be?
Actually, I'm not dodging the question. I'm telling you directly. If you care about that sector of the labor economy, there is something that you could do. You could talk to your Republican allies and tell them to pass comprehensive immigration reform, get people work authorization such that they can't be exploited in ways that are harmful to our economy.
But wouldn't it just be a lot simpler to acknowledge the law of supply and demand and know and affirm that when you have an overabundance of low-wage labor, the rate of labor goes down, wages go down? Are you denying that fact?
If you talk to the agricultural economy, agricultural sector, if you talk to the construction sector, if you talk to the service sector, what they're going to tell you is that immigrant labor is vital. Blue-collar immigrant jobs are vital to our economy, and that absent that labor, the American economy is going to slow, and that is going to harm all Americans.
So this is like a macro question, but I wonder if it ever occurs to you, how did you, a liberal law professor from New York City, wind up the spokesman for big employers who exploit low-wage labor? How did that, do you ever think, like, how did I get in this place? You're defending agricultural and service sector employers who pay low wages. Like, did you think you were going to wind up in that place when you were a kid?
I'm not sure we're having the same conversation.
I think we are.
What I'm saying is what the same thing that the organized labor said when we had the last time that we came close to comprehensive immigration reform. They supported comprehensive immigration reform because they knew that was good for all American workers. And it was Republicans that obstructed that. And so to the extent that there is exploitation of immigrants and that is harmful to our economy in ways that I completely agree, you should speak to your Republican allies who obstructed comprehensive immigration reform.
You are taking the line of big employers, of the plutocrats, of the Chamber of Commerce, and you're repeating it verbatim. You're saying unless we have massive amounts of foreign low-wage labor, it's going to be very hard on our economy. No, it's going to be very hard on people who seek to pay lower wages to their workers, isn't it?
No, actually, the laws of supply and demand operate regardless of our immigration laws, right? And so that's why, and that is why we have, one of the reasons why we have a large undocumented population is because our immigration system is so broken that there aren't legal mechanisms for the blue-collar immigrant workers to obtain lawful status.
But we can't throw any of these people out under any circumstances because that's inhumane. Wouldn't that just be the fastest? If you're not here legally, leave. Everyone's wages goes up. We have got a lot less poverty in the state of California, New York, Illinois, and Texas. Why is that bad? Because why exactly?
Yeah, so it turns out it doesn't work that way because it's not realistic to think that there are 11 million undocumented people that we're going to round up when we're already spending more on immigration enforcement than we are on all other federal law enforcement combined.
Professor, we don't agree, but I appreciate your coming on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Up next, Charles Murray went to Notre Dame today, defying various people who demanded that he not be allowed to speak. We sent a reporter there. He'll tell us what he saw. Plus, Bill O'Reilly just published.
Wide.
Sociologist Charles Murray was supposed to speak yesterday at Middlebury College in Vermont, and he would have done so if a mob of protesters hadn't decided to stop him. UC Berkeley is in turmoil tonight, real turmoil, as rioters set fires and forced the cancellation of a speech by writer Milo Yiannopoulos.
Milo Yiannopoulos is a fascist.
You tried to express your views and were prevented by a violent mob.
I was, bundled in, put in a bulletproof vest and whisked away. And that is the price you pay for being a libertarian or a conservative on American college campuses.
Well, across the country, you've seen an uproar on college campuses over free speech, whether people whom fashionable liberals disagree with ought to be allowed to talk at all. Should they be allowed to speak? Well, if you have an idea that doesn't fall within the narrow spectrum of currently popular left-wing views, you can expect harassment, bullying, physical attacks. If you're trying to give a speech, a disruptive protest is almost a certainty. How did this happen? Today was no exception. Sociologist Charles Murray went to Notre Dame today, and a mass of people showed up to get mad. Fox News national correspondent Matt Finn was there. He joins us now for an update. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Tucker. Well, Dr. Charles Murray is an acclaimed yet controversial social scientist with decades of research in issues like socioeconomics, race, the American culture, and now the 2016 election. But today, Dr. Murray was greeted by protesters here on the campus of Notre Dame because students disagree with some of the conclusions in his book, in which Dr. Murray writes that a person's intelligence depends on a few key factors, including genetics, upbringing, class, and race. One particular passage that students seem to be outraged over in one of his books is when Murray writes that little boys who grow up without fathers tend to reach adolescence unprepared for life. Protesters basically say Murray's research is bogus because he's racist, while others say Murray is simply presenting the hard truths from his research. Take a listen to two students today on the campus of Notre Dame.
Yeah, I do think he's promoting a racist agenda. One of the definitions of racism is believing that you're superior, that your race is superior to another. And in his book, The Bell Curve, he clearly states that he believes black people are less intelligent than white people. He also says he believes Eastern Asians are more intelligent than white folks.
People on the left, such as those who have gathered here, will take out little snippets of those quotes, little pieces of analysis, and they'll present it as if he's like, some white supremacist or Nazi, and putting ideas onto him that he didn't actually express. And I think that that's the source of a lot of the controversy around him. Not actually what he believes, but rather what they want him to believe in order to have this kind of gigantic controversy.
Dr. Murray also touched upon the rise of President Donald Trump, saying Trump won because he tapped into an anger in the middle class that was tired of being ignored by the Democratic elite. Tucker?
Looks like a lot of fun, Matt. Sorry I missed it. Thanks for doing that. Notre Dame professor Philip Munoz was the one who invited Charles Murray to speak on campus, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on. How did it go?
It went pretty well, at least inside the venue where he spoke.
So what I've noticed, is that debate itself seems to be under attack and maybe disappearing on college campuses. The assumption that people who disagree with one another on issues can get together and kind of hash them out. Do your students and your fellow faculty assume that that's still a legitimate thing to do?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of students and at least enough faculty do believe we should debate these ideas. We should listen to both sides and try to learn and figure out what we think the truth is. But that's not true of everyone. Students are better than faculty, but yeah, we're doing all right.
Students are better than faculty. Well, that's one heartening piece of news from the front line, that tomorrow's leaders are better than yesterday's. So did Charles Murray say anything particularly controversial? Did anyone get up and try to debate him? Was there a crescendo to this event?
Well, we invited a member of our faculty, I presume someone who's very liberal, to offer commentary on the event, and he gave a very critical evaluation of Murray's work. He spoke for a good 15 minutes. So Murray spoke, critics spoke, and then we opened it up to Q&A, and there's some good, sharp questions. So, yeah, it was a good debate, I thought.
Man, that sounds so old-fashioned. One side says what it thinks, another side says what it thinks, everyone goes out for coffee after. Good for you for keeping this alive, this tradition that goes back 3,000 years. Did you take any heat from your fellow faculty members for it?
Sure, yeah. Some of the faculty were not very happy with me, but I will say 99 out of 100 comments were positive, and I'm proud of Notre Dame. I'm proud of our leadership. Even people who disagreed with Murray wanted this to happen, to say, look, we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to not have debate because you don't want one side to speak.
Right.
We're a university, and people need to be heard.
Really quickly, of the people who disagreed with you, where do they tend to be from on campus? From the engineering department, business school, or were they the sociology department, if you can generalize?
There were some social scientists and professors in the arts and letters. That's probably true.
Of course.
One correction to the record here, Tucker. We didn't go out for coffee after the event.
You did? Well, close enough. Professor,
We're a
thank you.
Catholic school, after all. Thank you very much.
Up next, couldn't get enough of the O'Reilly factor tonight? Fret not. Bill will join us in just a minute to talk about his latest book. Stay tuned. Time now for the Friend Zone, where we invite someone from within the building here at Fox to join us. With us tonight is the legendary Bill O'Reilly. He's been hosting The Factor for more than 20 years. He's also found time to write an entire shelf of books, a bookmobile, really. He just released his 24th. It's called Old School, Life in the Same Lane. Bill O'Reilly joins us now. Bill, I think I'm the only one who's interviewed about this book who's actually read it, and I really liked it. I'm not just saying that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Tucker.
Smart.
You know, you're an erudite guy, and I figured you'd dive right into it, and it spoke to you, I bet.
Well, it did, and I thought it was, I'm always won over by humor. I thought parts of this were actually hilarious. But just to explain quickly the difference, what you're trying to do is to help people understand the difference between old school and snowflake. What does that mean, and how do you tell?
Well, it's a philosophy of life. And those of us who were raised in traditional homes, as I was, we adopted, many of us, old school. I don't like the word values because that says that people who aren't old school don't have good values, and that's not what I'm getting at. All right? It's a point of view. It's a point of view. And the point of view is there are certain things that you do and certain things that you don't do. Whereby the snowflake culture that has risen dramatically in America in the last 5 years, they see life in a totally different way. So in old school, we spell out the traditional old school point of view, POV, as opposed to the snowflake POV. And then you know who you are, which one you are. And which one are you, Carlson?
Well, I hope I'm not a snowflake. But reading this, I'm thinking, some of these were really interesting. Some were, ones you would have guessed. Others weren't. So here's one that really stuck out. You know you're a snowflake if every single day, from the moment you wake up to the minute you go to sleep, you find something to be outraged about it, and it's all unforgivable. And I thought, that's not just liberals who are like that, actually. This cuts across the lines.
There are a lot of people who are conservatives who are like that as well. So it doesn't go down with your politics. Politics doesn't mean you're an old school or you're a snowflake. It crosses boundaries. One of the interesting things is I wrote this book with a guy named Bruce Fierstein, and Fierstein and I were on the Boston University newspaper, the Daily Free Press. He lives in L.A., all right? He's an old school guy, as I am, but he's a different kind of old school guy. I say that we go to the same school, but we take different buses. And so he's got a little bit of a different take on this whole thing. And I wanted that because, again, there's a whole bunch of subtleties involved in this philosophy.
So reading this, one of the things that kept coming back was just how annoying some of these attitudes are. And I thought to myself, well, how do we get here? Do you think the country being really rich for 100 years has contributed to this?
I think there's a softness that have come into the culture, and then I write about my father. My father's one of the stars of the book because he's the ultimate old school guy, and that he suffered through the Depression, and then he went to World War II, and that toughens you up.
Yeah.
And then since the Vietnam War, we've had a volunteer army, so that the military is still tough, but a lot of we Americans are soft, and we're full of entitlements. You got to give me this, you owe me this, and that's the snowflake culture.
Yeah.
That the world owes you stuff. The government owes you this, and you'll never prosper under that. I feel bad for the snowflakes because sooner or later they're going to crash land in a puddle, and they're not going to be able to get out. They're going to dissolve. And that's what I'm trying to get across is if you're a snowflake and you're committed to that, at least read old school, because there's stuff in there that will help you.
So one last thing that kind of surprised me, Billy Joel, you hold up as someone you grew up with, same age, same town. You hold him up as an example of someone who's old school. I would not have guessed that.
I know, and the others, I'm not going to tell you who the others are, that we have as good examples of old school folks are surprising as well. The reason is that Joel did it by himself. He didn't have a great family, dropped out of high school. He did all the wrong things. But he's an old school guy because he believed in himself and his talent, and he developed the talent. All right, he worked and worked and worked, and then he broke through. Yeah. And he's still an old school guy. I don't hang with him every night, but I see him occasionally. And we talk about the old neighborhood. I've known him since I'm 12, all right? And he's still the same kind of guy. And that's old school. So that's why I included Billy Joel in the book.
You definitely made me like him more. I will say that.
You what?
The name of the book, Old School? It's good. I liked it. Thanks a lot, Bill
All right,
O'Reilly.
Tucker. Thanks for having me in.